Hello, and welcome to the new normal, a series of virtual discussions intended to help us get out of our comfort zones and debate different perspectives of the future. My name is Todd Terrazas, and I'm your host. On this episode, we have Renée Cummings giving a talk on reimagining AI ethics. Criminologist, criminal psychologist, AI ethicist, and data activist, Renée Cummings specializes in diverse, equitable, and inclusive AI design, development and deployment, principled, responsible, and trustworthy AI strategy, ethical AI policy development and governance, AI risk management, AI crisis communication, and using AI to save lives. A Columbia University community scholar and the founder of Urban AI LLC, Renée works at the intersection of AI, criminal justice, and urban criminology. Passionate about potential of AI, she speaks internationally on how to use AI to solve many societal challenges, AI for sustainable development, AI leadership, and AI for business solutions. Following her talk, we will go into breakout rooms for 25 minutes. Afterwards, we will return to this main room for an open discussion. If you're watching this episode on Facebook, you can join us in Zoom by visiting thenewnormalseries.com. Now, without further ado, here's Renée Cummings. You're muted right now.
Thank you so much, Todd, and thank you again for inviting me to be part of this new normal experience. So let me just give a little background on how I got into AI and the route that I took there, which is very unconventional. So yes, I'm a criminologist and a criminal psychologist, and much of my work in AI has been looking at the question of risk assessment tools that have been designed to predict reoffending and recidivism. And many of these tools are also being used with juveniles. So once I started to look at these tools and look at how these assessments were being used, these algorithmic decision-making systems, and realizing that there were many concerns about these systems, how they were predicting, whether or not those estimations that they were making were overestimates, or whether or not they were really just biased tools. And what the research was showing us is that many of these algorithmic decision-making systems were indeed biased. They were biased because many of the data points that were being used were also proxies for race. So that whole question about how race filtered its way into or found itself into these risk assessment tools really had me thinking, because much of the decision-making in criminal justice are high-stakes decisions. We're playing with people's lives and liberty. And it made me start to think about that whole correlation between algorithms and civil rights and algorithms and human rights. And who was really providing the guardrails when it came to really looking at how these algorithms were behaving in the criminal justice system. So I found myself talking a lot about bias, discrimination, and systemic racism when it pertains to AI and criminal justice. But while I was doing that, I also developed this great passion for the technology because of its power, because of its pervasiveness, because of its promise. And I realized that this technology, or this suite of technologies, has the opportunity to really impact the world in very extraordinary ways. But if we were using it in these very traditional ways, to uphold the status quo or to replicate old biases and prejudices that have been there with us for all these years, for centuries, I kept asking myself, are we cheating ourselves when it comes to AI? Is this approach to AI that does not pay attention to bias and discrimination and systemic racism really undermining the potential of these tools and really undermining the kinds of imagination that we can see when it comes to AI? So I became very vocal about bias, discrimination, systemic racism. And when I was looking at bias, I was not only looking at bias through race, but of course, gender and sexuality, disability, mobility, access to resources. All of these things were really important to me. So I started to think about how could I impact AI? And I felt that criminal justice and criminology in particular needed to be the conscience of AI because we were seeing some of the biggest mistakes there. Today, we're all talking about facial recognition technologies and the fact that they are biased to people of color, people who identify as women, anyone who comes from a basically diverse demographic could be misrepresented through this technology. We saw a recent case, arrested by algorithm, where someone was wrongly incarcerated or arrested because of an algorithm. And now more and more people are talking about the impact of algorithms on policing, AI policing, and how we are seeing many of these tools that are being infused with AI, coming from that realm of predictive analytics, really becoming more and more draconian. We are seeing the over surveillance, the intensive surveillance of communities of color. We are seeing these technologies being deployed in communities that are unaware of these technologies. So much of my work in criminology has been around violence and reducing violence, gun and gang violence, homicide in particular. And I think it is homicide that really gave me a love for data and for an understanding of data that calls for going behind the data. Every time I looked at a homicide statistic, I always asked myself, what is the tragedy of the life attached to this number? What is the trauma of the life attached to this number? And what kind of intervention could have been made to change the trajectory of that life? And it is that understanding and that appreciation for a psychological and sociological interpretation of numbers that also made me love data just a little more. And one of the things that I do is I really try to democratize data within the context of AI. Because for too long, we've used data to divide. And I kept saying to myself, how long are we going to continue to use data to divide, to use math and science to present this facade of objectivity and neutrality, when we know that it is totally contrary to that? So I started to look at data and started to look at ways in which we can disrupt the data. We could dismantle the data. We could deconstruct the data. And in much of the work that I do, I always try to bring that appreciation of psychology and sociology to the understanding of data. Data has a historical context. It has an environmental context, a sociological, an economical, a psychological context. And when we're using data in AI, how are we thinking about that? How often do our data scientists, our designers and developers think about that? So when we talk about things like diversity and inclusion and equity when it comes to AI, it's real. And it's real in the sense, they're very popular terms right now, and they may be the latest fad, but they are real terms in the sense that when you have that diversity around the design table or in the C-suite or throughout the life cycle, from development to deployment, design, development, deployment, when you have that presence that is diverse and that is inclusive, you will find that the imagination is really sparked in different ways. So one of the things that I really try to encourage is that we think about the history of data and we think about all those proxies for race or for different forms of discrimination that can find themselves in the data. And when we think about the history of data, we've got to understand the context in which the data was collected. And it's really important. And I always say that data collection is inherently privileged. So there is that element of privilege in data collection. And we've got to ask ourselves about the privilege in data. So one of the things that I always like to think about is who is collecting the data? Why are they collecting this data? How are they collecting this data? Where are they collecting this data? What are they going to do with it? What was the design question? How was it funded? And all of these things are really important. And that's when we start to see how biased and how discriminatory data can really be. And if we are working in an industry where data is the blood of the industry, we've got to ask ourselves, what are we really doing? And how are we really doing this? Because to me, AI is probably the greatest piece of technology that we have. And something that I always say is, I wasn't there when we when the printing press was invented, but it was extraordinary. I wasn't there for the spinning jenny that probably started the Industrial Revolution, but I'm here from AI and I'm gonna be involved in it. So many people ask me, so how did you get into AI? And I always say, I invited myself to the party because I realized that there were things that needed to be said and someone had to say it. And I felt that many of the challenges that we were going to see would be challenges in particular in criminal justice and of course in healthcare, and we've seen those. We have seen it in hiring, we have seen it in finance, we have seen it in any housing. We've just seen that this same data that we've been using has been creating a lot of challenges for many of the tools and many of the systems that are being designed. So the good thing for me and for many people in the industry is that people are now talking about AI ethics. AI ethics seems to be the biggest conversation right now. And this is why I said, while we are reimagining data, what we are also seeing is a movement. And when it comes to AI ethics or data ethics or digital ethics or tech ethics, we are seeing a movement right now. There is a groundswell. For me, it is moving away from the apology, because we have seen the apologies, all the big tech companies, the different challenges they face, the different types of crises, the products that have been really seen as discriminatory. We've seen those. So we've got to move from apology to action. And action is about sustainability. And we've got to now build a sustainable future for AI. It is so critical. So my clarion call to you is, what are you going to do, you disruptors, to disrupt the data, to deconstruct the data, to dismantle the data? What are you going to do to help reimagine AI? And once we do that, how are we going to distill AI to ensure that we have the access, that we have the kind of technology that is going to create a legacy that we can be proud of? And finally, I would just like to say, in everything we do when it comes to data, we should always have an ethical approach. And an ethical approach doesn't depend on the organization. Ethical approach depends on the individual. So when you move into your offices and your design rooms and all the spaces in all these tech companies that you are, just remember one thing. What is the legacy that you want to leave with this technology that you were designing? Thank you very much.
Amazing, thank you so much. So we're gonna go into breakout rooms. And so your prompt is, right, how do we take the philosophy of disruption to data? Amazing.
Definitely, yeah.
All right, well, 1 second, we're gonna go in. Hey, Renee, how was your breakout session? You're muted, sorry.
I said it was excellent. I think we had a very diverse group, the three of us, and we looked at the trade-offs. We explored the technology. We had a very, what would I call it, a capsule lightning presentation on algorithmic fairness. And we also looked at how it's being used in the criminal justice system. We looked at whether or not we can have sort of trade-offs, or we can balance accuracy and reduce discrimination. We also looked at how we can develop algorithms in a more fair way, and if that's going to take more technological tools, or how those technological tools are going to be, sort of designed. We also looked at, we got an historical perspective from one person in the group who was there for the start of Microsoft. And I think he gave us a lot of optimism that eventually AI will work all of these things out, just like the PC industry worked out their kinks. So it was very informative. Yeah.
Amazing, great to hear. Does anyone else like to share what they talked about in their breakout room?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I can hear me. Well, first of all, I wanted to share that I think that we are living in disruptive times in general. And in a way, this is what I've been dreaming about for a very long time. I have a startup accelerator. I have about 20 different inventions. And one of my challenges was, for the last 2 years, I was running around the LA tech community, spent a lot of time and money. And I felt like to some extent was spinning my wheels, because it was there was an efficiency problem with all of the finding the right person to do the right thing and networking and so forth. Now we can do it very efficiently. So now just additional steps. And then I also love to hear from Catalina, who is studying AI and I believe, design at Columbia University. And she was talking about ethics and the idea that they have a lot of ethics, which is good to hear that, that's a huge, big thing. And Paul was really nice, and that this is great. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Catalina, did you want to say anything?
No, I think, yeah, we just explore a little bit about what everyone does in their living. And I was just telling her that I'm in the middle of my degree in applied analytics. And yeah, and anything related to ethics, because I have a background in philosophy. So it's very interesting how both of them are, I'm trying to connect them, like the ethics and AI. So it's very interesting to see and to hear about the subject itself. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Marcin, what were you talking about in your room? I think you were with Renee. You're muted as well.
Yes, I was with Renée and all good. So I'm happy that there is that people are thinking about this topic more and more. Basically, 3 years ago, the topic didn't almost exist in research. Now, at almost every university, on every major, there are classes where students are taught that this might be a problem. But I'm sometimes disappointed when I actually attended some classes that there's not yet a consensus about which tool can be used to actually help. So when at university students are taught how to train neural networks, they are then maybe informed that bias is a problem, but very rarely they're actually taught how in practice train a model that is not biased, at least in 1 or 2 dimensions. So it's probably we need a few more years for certain technology to emerge that would be accepted as universal and then maybe taught at university as well.
So Marcin, can you hear me? So are you saying that the AI, I'm not that familiar with AI. I'm not an AI programmer, even though I have an AI company, but I'm getting into it, into robotics and so forth. I just posted something about Blade Runner, by the way, on my Facebook. So please add me on Facebook if you can. I went through this whole thing of Blade Runner. Blade Runner was set in November 2019. Okay. And there were a lot of ethical issues that are kind of obviously posed in that environment. Are robots going to be or if they're sentient and they're able to think, will they then have emotions? And my answer is yes, they will. I believe that once you create life, some type of life and mechanistic life, and if it gets complex enough, at some point it tips over and it will have emotion. And there is a ghost in the machine. And I've actually experienced this myself. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. So there is a ghost in the machine. And so therefore the ethics are highly, highly important here. But again, it's all evolving. You know, I don't think the robotics or the AI really have evolved to that point yet, based on what I've seen at Caltech recently. I was there about a year ago on an international conference, robotics conference. And I mean, there's still so much to be done. But even so, eventually there will be a ghost in the machine and it can turn against us. So, but then whatever, I mean, it is what it is. Everything.
But I would maybe argue that AI as a term is actually overused. Most often people should talk about machine learning, about pattern recognition, and there is not even a consensus how you could approach to train a general intelligence. You may think about a transfer learning, like how to make an algorithm that can be taught different things that are less related to each other. And this may be a path for to develop general intelligence. But AI, I mean, there is not even a consensus how to approach this problem. So I would say that it's safer to think that what you are using is a sophisticated algorithm for finding patterns in the data. If the data are biased, your patterns are going to be biased. But also, if you are just blindly going to believe your algorithm without having your own judgment, you may just hurt people because you're just finding patterns in the data in a more or less sophisticated way.
Mm-hmm.
Who represents Seattle area.
The question becomes, how many variables? You're talking about variables and an algorithm, and it becomes biased. What was that? Okay, so you're talking about an algorithm, meaning an equation, and the human being so far is the most, that we know of anyway, the most sophisticated being. We take into consideration all kinds of little things that you can't quantify, like a person's facial expression, or they might say things one way, but they mean something else, or they're lying, or they're all kinds of, we're very sophisticated beings. And so to get at exactly what you're saying, you're going to have a biased algorithm, because it's very hard for a sophisticated human being to think of everything. I'm a believer in a higher power, and I believe that the higher power has created us with all of these sophisticated elements, and that we human beings, we're only going to create kind of a sub creation, really. I don't know that we will ever be able to take into consideration all of the variables that need to be in the algorithm so that it will not be biased. So, but it's an interesting situation, and certainly we're benefiting from the automatization. I'm sorry, I speak 4 languages. How do you say it in English? Automatizare. How do you say automation? The automation is going to benefit in the sense that as long as it's accurate, we'll have little chatbots and things like that, and we'll be able to get a lot of things done, you know, that way at least, and then we'll eventually get into, you know, more and more automation. But it is interesting, the idea of bias.
I would like to also, oh yeah, so no, yeah, I have.
No, I would just to throw another thought from my perspective. I remember 20 years ago, HR departments in big companies were looking only at the results of the psychological tests, and that was the criteria of hiring someone or not. Meanwhile, we know that yes, this is an interesting data point, but that's not the decisive element to hire someone or not. So I see something similar developing with the AI. So we will not only blindly trust the results of the systems, but we will take it as a data point. At the same time, also have another angle, develop another angle. I think today we trust too much blindly into it. And this will eventually evolve, and good that we're having this kind of discussions. This is contributing to a change in this respect. That's one thing. Martin, you wanted to say something else.
I wanted to say that also maybe it will be interesting to talk about when certain algorithms or AI solutions are deployed. Because one problem can be that the algorithm itself can be biased, but also kind of, how to say, a biased deployment can hurt. Like if you are having a perfect algorithm who is really trying to tell you, for example, how to optimize your ads in order to make people to pay for something, but you are deploying this in addictive games to make a vulnerable group of people to play more and spend more. I mean, you may have a really good algorithm who do not bias, who is not biased towards any group of people, but you are deploying this in such malicious way to actually hurt people. So this can be also very important distinction, that there can be like that some scientists may work on solutions to make it less biased. You may collect better data to make it less biased, but also think how and where you are deploying it.
That's a really good point. I was at a video game company the other day, and we picked up one of the video game books. It was a beautiful company. It was going out of business. We were looking around to buy, you know, whatever they had. Everything was brand new, but then we opened up the book, and the stuff that we saw in the book was basically, it was devil. It was like the devil. I'm sorry. It was just what, I don't even want to describe what it was, but these are vulnerable children that are being exposed to this, and their mind is being essentially destroyed by this input, and they're being addicted to, at least that particular book had something that was just absolutely outrageous. I literally just almost ran out, or I ran out. I said, I got to get out of here. I can't look at this. So there's a huge challenge now. We have an opportunity to really examine what is really going on and what kind of input is being put into especially our children's minds and our future, our people, you know, is our greatest resource. And is this really the best in everybody's best interest? And perhaps there should be some type of oversight in that regard. I don't know what kind of oversight, but I certainly would lobby for that. Yeah. That's a very good point, Marcin. Thank you.
And you should check out, yesterday we did a debate on Are Machines Conscious? And so I felt like you should have been there for that. We will upload it to our YouTube channel tonight. And so definitely go check out our YouTube channel, and you'll see this huge debate. It was like an hour and a half long. It was really amazingly well done. Stephen actually was part of this. I think we're up out of time right now. And so I just wanted to thank again, Renée Cummings, for, you know, participating today in our new normal episode. Thank you so much. And if you have any last words.
You said?
Oh, sorry, I was saying, and if you have any last words.
Oh, no, just thank you so much. I think it was an excellent conversation. We've got to keep these conversations going. And I think we've got to go back to our office spaces and our design rooms and everywhere we can to ensure that this kind of change is sustainable, and to ensure that we don't marginalize, we don't use AI to victimize, and we don't use AI in ways that would create harm, but we use the technology to better humanity and to leave a great legacy.
Great way to end the episode. Thank you so much. And thank you all for participating today. Again, we will have another episode of The New Normal next week with Christopher Lafayette, and he'll be speaking about removing barriers to innovation. And so same time, same place. Hope to see you there. But enjoy the rest of your day and stay healthy and happy. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.